Welcome to The Current. In some industries, if you get things wrong, people lose time, money, or even momentum. In others, they lose their lives. And that's what makes today's conversation so important. For the last 3 decades, today's guest has worked in and around environments where there is absolutely no room for complacency. First in petroleum, where one mistake can have catastrophic consequences, and then through the business he founded in 1995, helping organizations think more seriously about safety, responsibility, and what it actually means to protect people. His company, B Sims, has grown into a respected specialist business, supporting clients across construction, hospitality, energy, and other high-risk sectors. Not just with compliance, but with practical thinking, education, and culture. This is a conversation about leadership, accountability, and why safety is never just paperwork. Bernie, welcome to The Current. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thanks for this invite.
We're really looking forward to this episode because it's such an important topic that we all have to deal with on a day-to-day. So let's just start with a little bit of your story behind the business. I know it did mention you founded it back in 1995, and before that, you were in the petroleum industry. So maybe what did that earlier world teach you about risk and responsibility?
Well, I started actually in a drawing office as a civil engineering draftsman. During the course of that time, got invited to progress my career to a design level and then eventually to project engineering. And so with my sort of drawing and design background, I managed to win a work in the petroleum engineer and in petroleum. So what it taught me is you can't make mistakes, especially in a high-risk industry like the petroleum industry. Essentially, quality is everything. So if you do it right once, that means you can do it right consistently. And that's really what I brought to the company that I set up in 1995. It's a tough call, but one that we really sort of rise to that challenge, as it were, by the processes we've adopted and the rigor that we adopt with everything we do and every decision that we make.
Yeah, thank you for that background as well. So when you founded the company, is B Sims, what gap were you maybe seeing in the market at the time? What problem were you trying to address?
Well, it coincided with new regulations coming in, the Construction Design and Management Regulations 1994. They actually came into being in 1995, and that's when I started the company. So the gap was in, working with those regulations, which were brand new, and, trying to breathe sense and practicality into them. There was a lot of scare stories in those days about you won't be able to use ladders. You'd have to have a risk assessment for opening a bag of cement and stuff like that. And clearly that was not the intention of the regulations or the regulator. So I guess it was my experience in petroleum that I felt gave me a little bit of a head start with the competition and trying to, risk assess things sensibly. Not to the point where you stop work happening, but to the point where you were making an impact on people's health and people's safety. So, yeah, I felt well placed to start the business and offer the service that we did.
Yeah, I like it. I guess it's about using your previous experience and then adapting to the future environment.
Yeah, indeed.
And a lot of people, when they think about health and safety, we immediately think about, paperwork, red tape, rules. But in reality, when it's done properly, it is much more serious than that. So from your perspective, what does safety actually mean in practice, in day-to-day?
I guess really for people to take responsibility for themselves, first and foremost. I always say to people, when you're going on site, think about self-preservation. You only got one life, you only got one body, so look after it. So that's the first thing. And then translate that to others, not a selfish industry, this, we want everyone to go home safely after a day's work. So essentially it's about, taking a really practical approach to health and safety. I remember speaking with a health and safety executive member many years ago, and I can't remember how the conversation went other than the point that he made was that when you look at something and it offends you, it's probably wrong. So let's not try and make a science out of this. Look at something. If it looks wrong, it probably is wrong. So do something about it to protect yourself and to protect others. So it's a really straightforward approach. And when accidents occur and you speak with people who witnessed it or survived the accident, invariably it's actually quite simple. It's not a complicated thing that we have to do here other than foresee, look, and do what you've been trained to do and keep it sensible.
Yeah, I guess it's quite simple, really, and it's using that intuition that we all know. Oh, that looks a bit unsteady, and not turning a blind eye, as they call it as well. So, in particular, why would you say that construction still has a lot of work to do when it comes to safety? Maybe thinking about comparing it to other industries.
Right. Well, every site is different. Even if you're doing the same thing to a similar site, every site is different. And in that regard, it's a lot more complicated in construction than in a factory environment where there's repetition. Everything should be the same place all the time. Construction is a lot different in that respect. And therefore the challenges are greater because although there may be regularity, as I said, about an activity, it has to be in a context each and every time. It's a different context each and every time. And therefore, it just makes it a little bit more complicated. I did read one statistic also about the number of people who are permanently employed in the construction industry, and it's a really small minority of people that are permanently employed. So you have this transient workforce, invariably very capable tradespeople, but they're going from one employment to another, or they're self-employed, or they're a very small company. So it's very fractured compared to other industries again. So there's another challenge. I suppose an further challenge is the numbers of people in the industry. We have typically not attracted people into the industry. Why would you want to work on a cold, muddy construction site in the winter? And so I think attracting people to the industry has been tricky, and therefore there's always tended to be something of a labour shortage. Another thing, there's quite a few factors in answer to your question here, Blaise. Another thing is the industry, when they say, the economy catches a cold, construction industry catches flu. So we end up with booms and slumps in the construction industry, a little bit sharper than possibly others. Once people have left the industry or been made redundant or there's not enough work for them, they might find other things. They might find them, more conducive to their lifestyle and whatever. And so getting people to remain in the industry after a difficult time, can be challenging as well. So there's a host of things that make the construction industry more challenging than many other industries.
Yeah, it's clear to see it's a one-of-a-kind situation and why probably safety is even more important. Yeah, thinking about a few of those things. Now, thinking about it in a positive aspect, a little bit more positive, we know, of course, you've seen this industry across a relatively long span of time now. If you compare maybe construction and the safety culture today with what it was like 20, 30 years ago, how would you say it's improved for the better?
It has improved a lot. I think the CDM regulations and other regulations that have come into being or been updated over my 30-year period in this business have had a positive effect, broadly speaking, particularly as far as safety is concerned, a little less so as regards to health. When I started the business, coming out of a regulated and high-risk industry, being the petroleum industry, I have to say I was shocked at the poor level of compliance. So in many respects, consideration of risk, working at height being the major reason for fatalities in the industry, lack of wearing PPE, personal protective equipment, it was poor. And I have to say, it was a real shock to me coming out of the petroleum industry. I couldn't say that now. Things are so much improved. I think all duty holders, to a greater or lesser extent, have upped their game. So that starts with clients, designers, contractors, subcontractors. So there's been a lot of really good stuff happening over the last 30 years. And I like to think myself and many others in the industry have had a positive impact on what was, I think, a really poor performing sector of.
Yeah, it's definitely clear to see. There's been a change, which is good, and I guess change is good for the future. But obviously, there are still some areas where maybe it falls short. I know we've talked previously about impact of major events like Grenfell, and obviously the periods of under focus or overreaction. Maybe just be able to talk a little about maybe the impact of those major events and how they affected our view on health and safety.
Yeah, well, that's a big one, isn't it? Clearly. When it happened, I remember seeing some footage of one of the fire tenders approaching, and the question was, how the hell could this happen? With those visual images that still are spine tingling, flaming torch where people lived, going up in smoke. It obviously shouldn't have happened, and the inquiry has found many reasons why it did happen. And the result of that, the Building Safety Act and the related regulations that have come in allied to that act, are the result. Where do we go from here? These regulations are very challenging to adhere to, and they have delayed many projects for reasons that the regulator has been able to demonstrate. Lack of design consideration in many areas, and not being able to demonstrate that they have processes in place to manage change, to manage changes of risk when designs changes, etc., etc. So it's a massive piece of legislation. We as people in the construction industry, love the construction industry, must do everything we can to make those regulations work, and work such that that accident is never ever repeated. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say on the matter. It's been a very challenging period obviously for the families of the deceased, for people who are still living in buildings that have got the wrong cladding on, and coming back to the construction industry, a challenge for the construction industry to get to grips with this new legislation, and ensure that they can still do what we've all set out to do, is building homes for the future, making sure people have got a nice standard of accommodation to live in, but at the same time feel confident that such a tragedy is not going to happen again to them or to anyone else.
Yeah, it was a serious wake-up call to everyone in the industry. And I think you're right, though. I think there's some positives that come out of it, the tightening of regulations. Because obviously we know there's a difference between doing safety properly and just looking like you're doing it properly. So quick question, where do you see businesses go wrong when safety becomes more of a paperwork exercise instead of something real and meaningful?
I think, whilst there have been improvements culturally as well as in actual fact, I think sometimes health and safety is still seen as an impediment to running their business, as it were. Whereas the agency and academics have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that, the benefits of good health and safety far outweigh the cost of implementing health and safety. There are benefits. There are massive benefits. Think about the cost of bringing a child into the world, their education, their training, and their experience that they gather along the way. It's a massive cost, millions of pounds, and you lose one person. We lose about 30 people a year in the construction industry. That's 30 million pounds. I mean, it sounds horrible equating somebody's life to money, but those are the facts. And if you look at companies that have grasped health and safety, the efficiency that comes with that is so much greater. Separating people from machines so they don't end up with problems with vibration. Lots of really good technologies coming into being now that have and in the future hopefully will help reduce the incidence of accidents and, improve people's health, broadly speaking. Where do people go wrong? I think it's cultural. I think it's time that people think is wasted. They could be doing things differently or better without. And essentially, people's mindset needs to change. So going back to the petroleum industry, everyone knew that if you got it wrong, there'd be a fire, an explosion, possibly multiple fatalities. I actually worked in the airports in the petroleum industry, and clearly if you refuel an aircraft with the wrong fuel or contaminated fuel, that plane is potentially going to fall out the sky. Now, that's so culturally in the petroleum industry, nobody takes chances. It's serious, so serious. And, being practical about it, the construction industry is not as serious because you don't have that hypothetical scenario of a plane dropping out the sky, but you still have, masses of risks that must be managed. And for people to, acknowledge that they may not have given it due consideration prior to asking somebody to do something, whether that's a designing something that's not ideal, too high risks associated with the design, or, a contractor instructing somebody to carry out a task which, once again, is, not fully considered. So the answer is simply culture. And once we've finished, or once we've improved the culture another step on, I think, people who are in the industry will feel that they have been worthwhile in what they've done. I guess culture never fully, you get to 100% do you with culture. It's always something that you've got to work on and, I've lost my thread a little bit here, work on, but, forever support, forever encourage, forever test yourself in a way. And in that regard, we should recognise that job's probably never finished, and we have to carry on reminding people about risks and giving them solutions to avoid those risks becoming a tragedy.
Yeah, I like it. Sure is key, I think you could say from that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're right, culture never ends. It takes well, I guess culture is always moving and evolving and growing, but I think, yeah, there's definitely a real need for people to take things a bit more seriously and maybe destigmatize it instead of thinking, oh, I got to do that. Oh, I got to wear my PPE. I got to do this. Really, you're right. I like that. You thinking about it, and it's essential. And the more you care about it, the less what incidents are going to happen. Let's bring it down to a little bit of a practical level. We did start to share some obviously practical tips there, but if we stripped away all of the buzzwords, not the anagrams, but the word on the abbreviations, the corporate language, what are the simple things that actually make sites and construction businesses feel safer?
Well, trick is early consideration. So, have a good look at what you're attempting to do. Why do we want this building built? What's the purpose of it? What's the functionality? If you're refurbishing a building, what might we find? So it's all about early consideration based on what we're trying to achieve, and engaging with the right people to assist in that review process. Not everyone on a project team, contractors included, are in at the beginning. And I think our job certainly is to carry out that initial assessment and work out what else is needed and who else is needed, what other companies, organisations, people do we need to assist in the design of that project. So that's the first thing. After that, it is about competency. There's been a hell of a lot of work that's been done over the last 30 years, establishing what does competency look like, and that certainly is the case post-Grenfell with the Building Safety Act, new regulations which are, detail the competencies required and how they need to be demonstrated. So getting the right people on, having established who those might be, and then working together with, honest, transparent, open discussions. The worst thing in a meeting is for people to assume that everyone knows what they're talking about. So you need a chair who's going to draw people in who are maybe a bit quiet, sitting on the sidelines. It needs to explain things that maybe have been said, but not everyone knows what they mean. So it's about communication and having, a forum within that project team that creates or allows for open conversation. Whenever I've interviewed somebody who's had an accident, that may include a designer who's been, drawn into the inquiry. Very invariably, people will say, I didn't know that. I didn't know. And you think, well, you should have known as an electrician, as a roofer, as a whatever. And as far as the design is concerned, they really seriously didn't know. I'm not questioning anyone saying I didn't know. If they said they didn't know, they didn't know. But then the question has to be, why didn't you know? What went wrong in the communication piece to allow you to do what you had to do without you knowing? So yeah, competency is king as well. So you've got the risk sorted out. You know what people you need. You get the competency sorted out, and then there's a transparent, open relationship such that people can communicate. If people don't know, they can ask. And essentially, with all those things in place, you should have a safe construction activity. You should have a new building, refurbished building, where everyone who's worked on that has gone home safe and without any dreadful underlying illnesses, etc. So, I mean, it sounds, just in a space of 30 or so seconds describing that, it sounds so simple, but it should be simple.
Mm.
Contrast, if you go into a meeting, I've attended many where you have a poor chair, but it's not really allowing for open conversation. And then there's a risk within that team of things happening that nobody's actually dead clear about. So, yeah, Hopefully it answers the question. Bit convoluted answer, but
No, that was
hopefully it
good.
answers the question.
That was good. That was very practical insights, and it's exactly what we needed to hear. Sounds like a lot of this comes down to leadership, because if the people at the top, the chairs and the boards don't take it seriously, I guess no one else will if they don't create these environments. So in your opinion, what percentage of responsibility would you say that the business owners and the senior leaders actually carry when it comes to safety? Is it a 50-50 split, or is it a 60? Just a quick number off the top of your head.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to put a number on it. Sorry. Business leaders are ultimately responsible for the businesses that they run, and they can't get out of that. I remember doing an audit of a contractor. I won't name them, it wouldn't be fair. And, at the end of the audit, I was asked to speak with two directors and give a verbal update. How are we doing? Have we got a lot of work to do and all the rest of it? And I said, can I just clarify something? Two directors here running this company. Who's the health and safety director? And they both pointed at each other. So, well, it can't be. It has to be one of you. And the point of the matter, they hadn't considered it, and they were effectively running away from the responsibility, each of them. And I said, well, sort it out and let me know, and I'll complete my report. But essentially, you have to be totally responsible. And of course, nobody wants to necessarily be the one that's in the dock. Of course, nobody wants to be prosecuted for a failing. But essentially, that then should drive you to make sure that everyone that you have responsibility for are the right people for the job. They have the training, they have the knowledge, and they have the support. And on that basis, nothing should go wrong unless somebody decides to ignore that good advice and do something that arguably they know they shouldn't do, or they feel circumstances have changed, therefore they'll take a risk and crack on. But I would say, business leaders, must be totally responsible unless any of their people that they've given that support, training, etc. to decides to go off and do their own thing, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, someone's got to take responsibility somewhere. That makes sense. Now, Bernie, I'd like to take you to a little short fire question round. Now,
Okay.
don't worry about the pressure, not at all. It's just a good exercise for the brain. Now, if possible, could you just give me a short, concise answer to these questions I'm going to ask you? We're going to go quite quickly.
Blaze, health and safety people don't give short, concise answers.
Yeah, I know. That's why we're challenging. We're proving that you can do it. Amazing.
Okay.
So, one thing the construction industry gets wrong about safety.
Sorry for the delay.
It's okay.
Time.
I like it. You're trying really hard. This is good. I know it's good. The one thing that businesses overlook the most.
Ask me again, please.
The one thing that businesses overlook the most.
Supply chain.
A one simple habit that could save lives.
Take a step back and think about what you're saying and thinking.
I like that. A belief about safety that other people might disagree with.
It's negative. It costs time and money, and there's no benefit.
Final question. One thing you would like to change overnight.
Better funding for the health and safety executives.
You can take a breath. You've done it. You've done really well there. Thank you, Bernie. Yeah.
No, it's really tough.
It is tough, but it's good because I like it. It's just a nice pause in the conversation. Yeah. Thank you, Bernie, for those short, concise answers.
No worries.
And I think you've really showed a lot in this conversation. There's been so much, but I just want to take a moment now to think ahead, looking ahead to the future. Where do you think the industry still needs to improve the most? Because we know we've come a long way, but there's evidently still a bit more. Where do you think we should maybe improve?
Well, clearly, health issues are the biggie. Safety has improved. You can demonstrate that statistically over the last 30 or so years, well, probably since the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. But health is proving to be trickier. Let's say people breathe in dust, that be asbestos, any dust, frankly. The period by which that becomes a health issue can be quite a long period of time. And in so doing, it means that people can take risks, not report exposure to asbestos dust, or even consider breathing in silica dust on a daily basis. People, because there's not an immediate effect, will tend to ignore it or dismiss it as not relevant. Construction industry, it's a very manual job. You meet site managers who have been on the tools, they've worked their way up, got themselves qualified and experienced, and then would admit that unless they had done that, they would have had to leave the industry, maybe in their mid-40s or whatever. It's backbreaking, some of the tasks that we ask contractors to do. Once again, things have improved there, but there are still many challenges. If you need to get a steel into a building, you can't necessarily have mechanical aids to achieve that, especially on a refurbishment project. And so there's still a lot of manual handling. But yeah, dust, manual handling, a big issue. So, you could take that across the board with vibration, working with lead, a whole host of health issues, which still need a lot more work to get those figures down. And we lose lots of bricklayers from the industry due to contact dermatitis. So you do see bricklayers wearing gloves nowadays, better hygiene facilities on sites, etc. So there's still so much more work to be done, to reduce the incidence of ill health in the industry. The agency have done great things in that regard, and their resources are very, very much geared towards improving health condition of workers in the construction industry.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, you're right. We've come a long way, but I think there's a lot more we can do. And thinking about the future, thinking about the next generation, yeah, I really appreciate that, Bernie. Bernie, I always again like to finish by thinking about yourself personally, thinking about B Sims. I know we've talked about your business, we didn't really touch too much about the amazing business that you've built as well. I'm sure people will be looking you up now. Now, if we jumped ahead, 2027, maybe I took you for a ride in my DeLorean, and you look back on 2026. What would have to happen for you to feel, both in the business and for you personally, that 2026 has been a real success?
Well, although I set the company up all those years ago, I'm pleased to say in 2021, we went the employee ownership route. Why did I do that? Well, people don't last forever, but I would like Bernard Sims Associates to last forever as a business. And so that's why we went the EO route. We've now got established, good functioning board of 5 people, myself, my wife, and 3 others. We have a new managing director. I stepped aside from the MD role at the beginning of this year. I'm now the chair. Dale, who's our new MD, is doing great things. We've all got massive confidence in him. He's worked for the company for over 10 years. And he's a very able person. So what do I hope for personally? Well, I hope for the company to continue its success. I hope that the employee owners in the business, really sort of enjoy having that extra say in the running of the business. I'd like for Dale to be able to say, yep, I've taken over the reins and here we go. We're going good. For me, a little bit more time to do the things that I like doing. My mum is 103 years of age and still going strong. I'd like the opportunity to see her more often. I'm a family man, seeing the rest of my family a bit more often. Family in America, I'd like to get over there a bit more often. Yeah, all of that stuff, normal stuff. But looking backwards, looking backwards from 2027, I should say, I just want the company to be successful, successful in terms of not just profitability, but well-being of everyone that works in the business and feeling that they have a genuine stake, which they have in the success of that business.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that as well. Now, on my rather philosophical signature question I ask at the end, you did touch on it there, and I think you can have a great answer as well, is what does freedom mean to you?
Well, I looked this up earlier, knowing you might ask me that question. It's multifaceted, isn't it? I think for me, I suppose it's it's a private freedom, isn't it? It's a freedom to sort of think and a freedom to do things that are the right things without unnecessary constraint. In a sense, in the construction industry, we've had to reduce freedoms in a sense. You can't do that because if you do, you might die or have a bad accident. You can't cut that paving slab without necessary PPE because you'll end up with silicosis, and that's terrible. So in a sense, I've spent the last 30 years of my life helping in the compliance of regulations which restrict people's freedom. Conversely, freedom of thought and freedom of action without constraint sounds the opposite of that, but I think you can justify it in terms of what you're talking about here. For me, freedom is freedom of thought and ability to, I guess, live your life in a very fulfilled way, which has meant something for the time that you've been on this planet.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answering that question. Bernie, just want to take a moment to thank you. Thank you for seeing that gap in the industry, seeing a need because you clearly saw a need to help people and help the industry, taking your experience from the petroleum industry and your background as well, and now continuing to apply it. And I really like what you said at the end. It's not about profit. It's about making sure people have an enjoyable life and that they are safer. And even though you may seem like you restrict people, ultimately you're giving them more freedom because when they are safer, they are able to go home that night and speak to their family, speak to their kids. That is true freedom. And Bernie, as well, we look forward to hear all about the company, how they continue to grow. And as well, we know now you have a little bit more time to look back and continue. But thank you so much. This really was a few lessons and a few reminders that we all needed to hear. So yeah, thank you for all your continued hard work and for coming on to the show today. Thank you very much.
No worries, Blaze. Thank you for the opportunity for me spouting off and saying the thoughts of Bernie Sims. I appreciate the opportunity.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Cheers.